by luck would have it, I sat next to Bill Gates when that event, and I actually got to spend like half an hour with him listening. And he said to me, "You're going to leave Microsoft one day because you're too entrepreneurial. So let me tell you 2 or 3 things that you're probably going to want to know."
Okay.
Which I thought were really interesting.
So that I can't leave it on that cliffhanger. So what if you had to pick one thing that Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer taught you, what would one thing be? So Fred, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you, Alfie. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. So I'm really excited to have become a small investor in Finxone. Can you tell me a little bit about the business, about the mission, about the problem that you're trying to solve?
Great. And again, first, we really appreciate all of our investors, no matter how small each one of us is part of the family, and each person joining is a small vote of confidence that our founders have taken great comfort in. So thank you. Now, let's talk a little about Finxone. Basically, we think that the problem that exists in most FinTech now is that everybody wants to stop and finish at the API. So most of the investment all in the FinTech infrastructure and the people that provide financial technology services to compete with the banks and the incumbents, basically everybody loves just providing infrastructure and stopping there. And I'm going to use a house example. Everybody loves providing power or broadband or water or sewage services, and they'll stop at the house. And that's what the whole FinTech industry likes to do. They just like stopping at your property line. The problem is you don't live in an empty field. You need something built. You need an experience. You need a bedroom. You need all of that other stuff. No one seems to be very interested in doing that for brands, in which case they spend most of their time having to build apps. They have to build user journeys. They have to build experiences. They have to build workflows. And they have to build all of these things to provide financial technology, be that an insurance company, be that a banking program, a card program, a remittance company, whatever it is that FinTech founder wants to do, they generally have to assemble thousands and hundreds of different API infrastructure pieces and somehow make them work. And that's not really the way the world works. You don't buy a car with a box of 1,000 parts and say, "Hey, Alfie, go and sort it out." You actually buy a car that's finished, and it actually even has a guarantee that if something breaks, you can bring it back and Audi will fix it for you. And again, that's not the way modern FinTech works, right? They'll give you a box of 1,000 APIs and let you hire expensive teams or try to work out yourself on how to use them. Now, that friction has effectively meant that very few people and very few ideas can see the light of day. So you can't really get your brilliant idea. Let's say you're an African entrepreneur on the continent. You have a really good idea for your community. You've got a couple of thousand people that if you could just club together, you could really solve this really big problem. The thing is that you don't know how to build all of this stuff. You don't know what the rules are. You don't know what the law says. You don't know any of that stuff. And here you have people in your country that are giving you some APIs, and you're like, what's an API?
Sure, yeah.
But you have a big problem. And so what Finxone is really at its heart and soul is about compressing that space so that the idea becomes everything. Because whatever you can think of, you can execute flawlessly because the AI will build it for you.
Yeah.
It'll comply for you. It'll take all of the workflows into consideration. It will take all of the rules into consideration, and it will just build something safe, compelling, and amazing off the back of your idea. So our effective problem that we solve is we go the last mile and take an idea from an entrepreneur, from a bunch of service providers of doing infrastructure into an actual built thing. And so that's really what we're doing. And we've been really, really delighted about how much traction there has been, not just from startups, but from ever bigger companies that are tired of this huge capital expense. They have every time they want to change something, it's a massive project. And the Finxone model is a small kind of subscription that you can change stuff on the fly yourself, and you don't need developers. So all of a sudden, that means that a business analyst, that means that a market unit lead, that means that an embedded finance lead in a big company can now do some FinTech-like things without having to spin up a massive project that takes 3 years and 5 million quid. So that's basically a little bit about us.
So earlier in your career, you were a 15-year Microsoft veteran. Okay, I've interviewed many Microsoft leaders, CTOs, architects, and people on my podcast before, but tell me a little bit about that journey. Give me the 15 years condensed into a couple of minutes.
So I was very lucky. My Microsoft career, I joined very junior. I joined, Microsoft people will know, level 58, way down in the weeds, and I left as kind of a senior director, which was pretty cool. So I did about 30 years worth of Microsoft career progression in a 15-year period. I was very fortunate. I took the right moves at the right time when things were done. So I did get an interesting chance to see different parts of Microsoft, from services, the enterprise group, the product teams. I got to see a lot of interesting sides of Microsoft. So first is you have to take your hats off to that company. Everything I left in 2014. And I left Microsoft to their, in the data center, their arch rival at the time, VMware, right? So they walked me out the building quite unceremoniously. But the cool thing about that is of the RevSum divisions, in other words, of the biggest businesses and lines of business the Microsoft had in 2014, not even 2 of the top 10 exist in 2024.
Oh, wow.
So just think about that. Imagine if you could go today to any business and say, right, 80% of everything you do now will not be here in 10 years from now. You won't care. All of the KPIs you currently manage will no longer be the same KPIs. All of the products right now that you're being told to hit will actually not exist anymore, and we'll issue this remarkable, complete transformation incrementally year by year, and nobody will notice a thing, and we'll still continue to be amongst the most valuable company in the world. If you just think about that.
That's scary.
Scary. It requires huge amount of mental elasticity. The Microsoft ride is just one that, if you could ever get in through their entry process, is just one I would recommend from almost any career perspective, because it just takes you into the big leagues and teaches you some just incredible lessons. The most of which is, on this annual period, the company reinvents itself. And so it's not that it's lack of attention to detail, but it will never fall off a cliff because it wasn't paying attention about what's next. And that's the most bit that I loved about that. So my funnest years at Microsoft were in the incubation division, which at the time was an initiative for Microsoft to invent its next billion-dollar businesses. So you had the big Windows and Office and these gigantic mega divisions, which right now are no longer as powerful as they used to be. And then you had these new divisions and new businesses that Microsoft wanted to get into at the time, cloud, all this other stuff. Did one of the first Azure deal in the UK, did the first Office 365 deal in the UK. I did a whole bunch of these things that were just completely off the wall compared to a company that just used to sell licenses.
Sure.
So the cool part about that for me is that it educated me on how to be an entrepreneur, because that was the incubation business division. We were an entrepreneurial division, building the brand new businesses of Microsoft, but backed by an 800-pound gorilla. So I always say that I wasn't a first-time founder the first time I built a business on my own, because I had been doing it at Microsoft for 6 or 7 years. The incubation business division, where I was part of for so many years, was that entrepreneurial business division that launched or embedded acquisitions into the enterprise sales model and just reimagined Microsoft. So I don't think I would have been as successful as an entrepreneur if it wasn't for working in that team, whose exact special forces mandate was we are an elite team building what's next in 5 years' time. And right now, the big green army does not appreciate us.
Sure.
I almost got in trouble the first time I did my first big cloud deal because it killed a licensing deal. And the licensing deal was 25 million quid. And it was replaced with a £2 million a year deal over 3 years. So the enterprise lead at the time said, you just took a 25 million quid deal and you turned it into 6. Yeah. But then it was a lighthouse win that Microsoft could build the rest of its cloud PR around.
Yeah.
So some people were very upset with our team. Other people saw us as the future. And that was a really interesting experience that I would say kind of a notes from the field that you wouldn't be expecting from the brand. But it was a very interesting experience, and I loved literally every day I was at Microsoft.
I think the entire time you were there, Steve Ballmer?
No. Bill Gates was CEO when I joined. Okay. I won an award from Microsoft. It was like a perfect evaluation grade, and then they flew me to Seattle and got on stage and they paraded you for a bit, and then I had a lunch with Bill and Steve.
Oh wow!
And Steve was COO at the time. Bill was the CEO. But I just by luck would have it, I sat next to Bill Gates when that event, and I actually got to spend like half an hour with him listening. And he said to me, "You're going to leave Microsoft one day because you're too entrepreneurial. So let me tell you 2 or 3 things that you're probably going to want to know."
Okay.
Which I thought were really interesting.
So that I can't leave it on that cliffhanger. So what if you had to pick one thing that Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer taught you, what would one thing be? Manage
the detail. Every single great entrepreneurial journey thinks that the idea is good enough and that just, I've had this idea. The idea isn't good enough. The execution is strategic. That's the part that Bill used to always believe. He would love an idea directionally, but he would back a better plan of a poor idea before he would back a great idea with a poor plan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So actually,
like perfect and not happening is it's not existing, but good or great and it happens is better than perfect because it actually gets out there and makes it happen.
Yeah. So he sent a book to all of us that time, that one called the Adherence Principle.
Okay.
And basically, I'll summarize the entire book, which was also the concept behind his lecture that day to the high-performing tier of people at Microsoft. And that was that a poor idea executed flawlessly will outperform a flawless idea executed poorly.
Yeah.
And on a math perspective, doesn't stand to reason. 4 times 3 should be the same as 3 times 4. And what Bill said was that's not true. Execution, high definition execution of an average quality idea will always win. So if you have an idea, great, fine. Focus your detail on how you're going to make that idea work and live. Focus on the KPIs, focus on the specific things that lead you to believe that that idea is good. Be willing to pivot from it if you need to. But the advice that we had on that day was pivot less. You've got this new school of entrepreneurs sometimes that comes across. It says, well, listen to the market and listen to the feedback and listen to everybody and change your idea 10 times if you have to. Well, actually, that's not following the adherence principle. That's not following an idea through to its logical thing. And the picture that he drew on the presentation that he gave us was a guy underneath in a tunnel looking for diamonds and giving up. And you could see that the guy was like, giving up, and then it was a sideways cutout. You could see that the diamonds and the treasure was about half a thing away that he just not cut through. The point I think that we're trying to make was that executing something to a high degree of conviction. Yeah. So if your idea is worth backing, if your idea has got some angel investors, if your idea has got some people already that you've convinced to join your journey, it's worth pursuing that idea to a great degree of integrity and conviction before you just quickly pivot and that your business that was supposed to sell widgets now turned into a consulting service that identifies whether widgets should be sold. Yeah. That's a complete pivot. Yeah. And maybe the adherence principle says just stick through that idea until really it is painfully obvious that it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Because what he noticed is our business groups at Microsoft at the time needed 3, 4, 5 years of solid conviction windows to drive through something new. And I thought that was a lesson. The other 2 were secret.
Okay, no problem. So after Bill and Steve, you didn't work under Satya?
No, Satya left. So Satya was taking over within a month or 2 of me leaving. And I always make fun of my Microsoft long-term things that it wasn't Satya, it was my departure. Because literally when I left Microsoft, it was at $25 a share and it's sitting at 427 and it's had a stock split. I'm like, guys, it's my departure that actually did it. The moment I left, things turned up for you guys massively. You all each owe me a 5% contribution, but sadly no one has bit that theory.
Well, as somebody that spent 15 years with the business, what are your thoughts on Satya?
He was the leader that the company needed at the time. And Microsoft had, from Bill and especially Steve, continued with high fidelity the original, again, say the word conviction and business models and strategies that Microsoft had. I think it would typify if you look at Steve Ballmer's era, talking about this concept that they had of 3 screens and a cloud. So what they said is there's 3 screens that you need to have: a mobile screen, some type of desktop PC screen, and maybe some type of tablet device. And that was like chasing the past. And we're going to own these 3 screens, and we're going to own a cloud that connects them. And that kind of conviction, and that, behind Windows Phone, behind all of these individual things. And what that betrayed was this over-focus still on trying to be a consumer company and a consumer at the individual productivity level. What Satya realized, what to anybody became obvious, is Satya realized that Microsoft is actually an enterprise company. Mm-hmm. Microsoft is probably the best enterprise company in the world.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Hey, this podcast is brought to you by WeLoveAlpha.com. If you're looking to grow and hire and scale your software engineering team in the UK, then go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software developers on the market. Everything across Java to C# to PHP to Python to React and Angular and mobile and more. Go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software engineers in the UK now.
And it knows how to keep millions of things that are mission critical running. And Satya came out of this, what was at the time called Server and Tools Business Group, which was the unsexy bit. It's server, and it doesn't sound even cool. It's like server tools. Doesn't sound nice. And he was the divisional president of that. And nobody who was a diehard Microsoft. We track everything, like the micro news. We track all of the secret insider stuff. Nobody saw Satya coming. Not a single person. And what the principal thing was, he said, is we're going to embrace the enemies that used to be our enemies in consumer. So we'll embrace Linux. We'll embrace open source software. And not just pay it marketing lip service. We will literally embrace it. We will start doing new things like Git and GitHub rather than trying to protect the Visual Studio Team System business. We're going to go off onto a multi-dimensional cloud that is first and best for other people. Like look at Microsoft and VMware now. They get along like a house on fire in data center virtualization. Yeah. So you look at all of the previous holy grails that had been built for 20 to 25 years. And it is irrefutable that Satya burnt them all down. And if you remember, a company doesn't exist. A company is not its own thing. A company is a collection of leaders and islands of politics, right? So you have these presidents of the business divisions that could make a decision that says, well, I'm the president of Windows, and here's what Windows stands for. And effectively, it behaves like it's a totally separate division of, then server and tool. Then it behaves it was a different division of, at the time, cloud was a separate thing, and it was different to the field sales organization. And you had these product leads, these product presidents that had their own effective software companies underneath them. That was difficult to herd them as cats. What Satya basically says, if you're not on the Microsoft strategy, you're fired. And he didn't mind making examples of anybody. So what happened is his leadership fell into line. And that's something, if you're honest, lots of people love slagging off Steve Ballmer. He was a great, great, great leader. What he did have against him, though, was basically a whole bunch of the presidents of the individual business units underneath it not following a plan. Okay. But he did have the loyalty of the Microsoft field sales organization. If you look at the average Microsoft account exec, we looked forward more to Steve Ballmer talking than we did Bill Gates. Bill Gates was some kind of
high energy. I love watching Steve on stage.
Yeah, he was like, so Bill was like, very methodical. It was like you're watching some TED talk from some incredible super savant. When Steve came on stage, it was a religious experience. It was like a thing that this is the heart and soul of who and what we are.
It's Tony Robbins right there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's exactly right. So I think not anybody really, whilst you had the people in leadership and senior leadership start making corps and stuff because it was largely about the share price, Steve had an incredibly difficult time, and I think there was a lot more buy-in and mandate about the transformation that was needed from Microsoft around the transition from Ballmer to Satya. I think what Satya got was buy-in that he could break all of the holy grails. I think it's an unfair analysis to Steve to say that he was allowed to run Microsoft the way that he wanted to run Microsoft. At the board level, there was still too much stuff. There was still too much alternate views. There was a burning platform created by Ballmer's departure that Microsoft did a complete reboot. So anyway, that's my very low level assessment from way down there on the lines, looking up at what they were doing up in the ivory tower.
Cool. Let me ask you about a few interesting things that you've said on previous podcasts that you've done recently. So I heard that you said the most important thing for you is to build technology which lowers gaps of inequality.
Yeah.
What do you mean by this?
So technology is friction. I mean, it's the ultimate. Tech is the ultimate inside old boy network school tie. Yeah. It is the ultimate. It's who you know. It's not what you know. And if you have the right people that can string together some stuff, the tech can actually work for you. But actually, it's a very closed and very exclusive system. It's very difficult. There's no such thing as ChatGPT, build me a Revolut competitor offering.
Not yet. Yeah.
We're working on that. And so as a result of that, there's too much what you know and the nuance of this, and there's too much specialization. So I keep thinking back to my time in Africa. I had 10 years in Johannesburg, and I fell in love with the continent and that potential. You had fundamentally people that weren't born with some of the privilege and weren't born with some of the advantages we all have in Europe and other places. But you have this fervent energy that tomorrow's a better day, and tomorrow's gonna be a better day. And we had so many people that worked in some of our businesses that didn't have formal education and training. They didn't have, I hired people sometimes that were guarding cars on the street, and they became development managers or IT infrastructure consultants later on. We would train people in some of the businesses that we were doing. What we were trying to always do is to give them a better playing field in which to launch themselves into their next thing, just to drop that inequality. What we realized then is that the technology was the ultimate kind of factor. It's still too difficult to use tech. Right? And I think, again, going back to the car analogy, there are at least 30 to 40 independent computer control modules in an average modern car. Most of us do not know what they do, how they work, or whatever. My car had an interesting issue the other day. Check engine light went on, so I downloaded a little app, connected a little USB thing, and then it told me I had 47 control computer modules in my car. Yeah, and then it finally told me that there was a bus underrun caused by a fuse so it did this huge amount of diagnostics. But that was cool because an idiot like me stuck a little thing, and then the answer came out to change fuse 17, it's burnt out. Sure. And that meant that it was no longer a 500-pound trip to the garage and everything else. It was almost the car could almost self-heal itself. And even if the part was defective, you could literally just unplug that black box, put in a new black box into it, and close it down. That's my inspiration for ideas in the modern world, where you've got AI generative technology, you've got technology of modules that are open source that people just understand how they work. But if the construction and assembly of those can become dynamic and intuitive, we can design ideas on paper really easily, right? Because paper is a frictionless mechanism. If you had an idea that you just took out on a big A3 piece, and you said, okay, here we're gonna have a customer, and the customer's gonna pay us some money, and then we're gonna have this module that identifies the top 3 things for that customer that want to do, and then we're gonna have this module that books it, and then we're gonna have that module that bills them and invoice it. If you could do it at that level of simplicity, that each box flowing to the other blocks was just automatic, you could actually build a business on paper.
Yeah, in theory, yeah.
In theory, and I notice a skepticism that you apply, which is exactly right. My passion is about taking that in theory and making that in practice. So if you can instruct what you want in box 1, and then box 2, and then box 3, and then box 4, I will have the technology that builds the interactions and the relationships between those boxes automatically done for you. And by the way, we'll apply the compliance of the police out looking at your 4 boxes to make sure that we've told you that it is legal for you to do what you're suggesting. You can do it. Here's how you do it. By the way, there's privacy that applies, so let's fix that. And by the way, there's something else that applies that you didn't know of, so let's fix that too. And it was all being done automatically. And we have that expectation in most things in life, but we still have this fear that tech is that last frontier of scary. And what I'm passionate about is making tech almost as simple as that, drawing blocks on a piece of paper that just automatically will somehow magic themselves into existence. Now that magic process requires a huge amount of technology, of engineering, of compliance, of intelligence models, deterministic models. It requires a huge amount of work and evolution. But at the fundamental synthesis is taking an idea at the human level that says, hey, I want to do that, and making that idea frictionless. That's really what it's about. I know I've given you the 10-minute version, but that's really what we're passionate about. That's what we have everybody at Finxone working on.
Cool. Something else you said, don't let your wins get to your head, and don't let your losses get to your heart. I love that one. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You as a fintech or as any startup entrepreneur, you're going to get a lot of no's, and you're going to get a lot more no's than you're going to get yeses. I think I'm at investor pitch 70,
Sure.
roughly. And if I look at how much I color code my diary, so if I look at in my diary how much red I've got for investor, how much green I have for customer, how much yellow I have for investor management. So like when I look at my color codings, I realize I'm spending a lot of time in individual meetings, getting a lot of no's. And if I let that get to my heart, I might very quickly lose my enthusiasm and lose the passion for what it is that I'm doing just because I keep getting people saying no. And some of them are diametrically opposite. So the guy from Monday will say, ooh, you have way too much reliance on your partner channels. You need to sell a lot more directly. And I'll be like, okay, fine. And then Tuesday's no will be, whoa, you have nowhere near the reliance on your partner channel. You need to do so much more partner sales. You don't need to do anything by yourself. Sure. So now we're both wrong.
Yeah.
And if you take a look at both of those opinions, they'll cancel each other out at -1, right? But you just think to yourself, okay, fine. So not for you, not for you, not for you, not for you, not for you. And that's the way that you think about it. It's not we're not right. It's just we're not right for you.
Yes.
And that's the advice I wish I could give to those entrepreneurs. It takes a huge amount of persistence. Not everybody just goes and has a quick idea and now they're Mark Zuckerberg a year later. Yeah. Right? The system is rigged. It's designed against normal success. And even by the time you do get to success, it's designed to have taken your idea from 100% yours to maybe you'll get 20% of the business by the time it's all said and done and you exit it. Right? And 80% of people will have come in at different phases, at different risk profiles and different appetites, but your idea got to see the light of day, but you probably got a lot of no's beforehand. And the corollary to that is don't let your wins get to your head. Nobody likes arrogance in this world. So you have to keep your team motivated and you should celebrate your internal wins. But nobody likes the vaporware business that says, congratulations, we've signed a massive global partnership with Xprog when it was actually a meeting.
Sure.
You got a meeting with a guy at Xprog that said, yeah, that might be interesting. And you're like, oh, major partnership. Mm-hmm. So the keeping it one level less bolstery, I think. I don't manage to do that every time. I get excited about wins.
Me neither, but it's good advice to live by. Yeah.
We try.
Yeah. Let me finish with some rapid fire based on stuff that you've posted on LinkedIn over the years, okay? In startups, we build the boat as we sail. What do you mean by this?
The idea is not good enough. It's just almost like a hull. Maybe it'll hold water, but there's no system. You can't live on it. You can't live from it. You can't do stuff. So as we go into a direction, you'll find that there are hundreds of systems, processes, and other things you have to get good at in startups that you might not want. So as a founder and entrepreneur, you're in love with your idea. Let's just say you're gonna build self-refilling glasses, and you just love the idea of self-refilling glasses because that's the thing to do. The thing is that there's a big difference between an idea and a business. So now you have to build the structures. You have to build manufacturing control processes. You have to build KPIs. You have to hire a field sales force. You have to understand how your channel works. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff that professional people in corporate get paid a lot of money to do and master that detail of. That might be a bit of a drag because it's like less cool. You want to be sitting there and doing events in the glass world and talking about how cool your thing is. But there's so much stuff you have to build. There's so much infrastructure. And I mean commercial, corporate processes, quality control, regulate. There's just so much stuff that a business needs that an idea doesn't.
That's very similar to something else you said as well. You said less time doing the epic stuff, more time doing the basics well.
It's exactly the same thing. Most businesses that I've seen who had epic, larger than life founders that didn't master the detail of their business.
Yeah.
If their idea wasn't as flawless as they thought, they went off a cliff. And that's because there was no resilience into their system and resilience in the model. They wanted to do the high value, cool stuff. They wanted to be here hanging out with you.
Sure. Yeah.
Doing the podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Yesterday, I was doing something a lot less fun. I was sitting with my team looking at the handover process between the sales organization and our customer delivery team. And we were battle testing all of the processes. Say, okay, so what meeting? What's the collateral? Is there a piece of paper that shows us what to do? What's the checklist? And that is groundwork in the detail, minutia.
Yeah, much less fun than this, but that's the foundation.
This is infinitely more fun.
Yeah, exactly. That will make you infinitely, a lot of money if you can nail that and make it, scalable and it can be repeated and trained to other people and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and what we discovered was something really interesting. So as we went through the process, I said, okay, now just imagine that we're now at the kickoff meeting for the customer.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that now that our solution consultants are finished, which are pre-sales, now that we have our delivery consultants, right now, how many have we hired? And they're like, 2. I'm like, are you telling me that the entire success of my business depends on these 2 graduate delivery consultants? And the guys are like, yeah, we didn't think of that. And it's like, okay, guys, risk, let's fix that. And to lead your idea, you need to master that level of detail, of analysis to understand. You need to be able to zoom in to any process in your business to understand what that is and then contribute towards it. At the same time, you also need to have experts that know more than you do and trust them to get on that job. So there's no point hiring a brilliant product builder and then telling them how to build product because you probably haven't done that before. There's no point in hiring a great world-class CFO and then telling them how to do accounting. It's just, it's ridiculous. But sometimes this whole new, young, 20-something, early 30s founder that hasn't had some life experiences of being hit enough yet, they, like I did in my first business, maybe fell in love with their own beauty a little bit too much. Whereas I think the humility of being able to be countermanded by your own management team saying, actually, boss, that's a bad idea. It's a bad idea because of these 3 things. So let's not do it. And then having the humility to say, okay, that's greatness.
Yeah. Let me finish up with one final thing you posted on LinkedIn. Some of these were from a few years ago, so they might not be immediately coming to mind. But pessimists sound smart, optimists make money.
Yeah.
So true, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that is completely true. Look at how many people. So how many analysts, Gartner, Deloitte, whatever, how many analysts that just point out the obvious flaw in Google's plans and Microsoft's plans, etc. How many analysts really believe in what they say?
Probably not many.
I would say not many because otherwise they would be stock traders.
Sure.
And they would be buying the equity of the reports that they're writing.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't need to write a report for Gartner or anybody else because they know how to predict the future and they know how obvious it is. So just put 50,000 quid onto it and watch it go 10x, right? So it's very easy to sit aside and go, that'll never work, 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 that'll never work. And to be negative requires no effort, is usually right, and can be confused by people as wisdom.
It's lazy though, it's just, you're scared to get in the arena yourself. So you'll stand from the sidelines and it's easy to be a keyboard warrior and comment on other people. It's very hard to actually take the risk and the gamble and get in there.
I have more respect for any entrepreneur than I do for the role that I used to have. I was a senior director at Microsoft. I had hundreds of people. I ran a continent for VMware. I did a whole bunch of cool things. And I was convinced at my own awesomeness because of my org chart or whatever else. I actually respect my first wife and her business that she's been able to build, which I think is actually pretty cool. She's got 4 branches now and she's doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I think the example that she set for our kids has been fantastic of just hard work. And she's built her own business. It's not going to take over the world, but she feeds herself from the work of her own entrepreneurial vision. And so do thousands and thousands and thousands of small business owners and small business entrepreneurs that they don't look forward to the 25th of the month. They fear
you got to pay other people. Yeah.
They fear it.
I know what you mean, man. Yeah.
They fear it.
I used to look forward to it. Like,
Corporate world. And at Microsoft, the system was designed to give you 4 quarterly bonuses and then 1 annual performance bonus. So 5 out of the 12 months would be an unusual payroll month. And that is fantastic, right? I mean, you get an extra huge amount of cash, and then obviously once a year you get shares as well, which are going up in stock. So the value proposition in the 2000s and the 90s for a Microsoft employee was incredible. And I never had to worry about things like, how am I going to pay my mortgage and all that stuff. It was all automatic. It was all kind of assumed. Even somebody running a hot dog stand, I have more respect for, because they don't know sometimes how they're going to be tomorrow. They don't have, but every day they have that attitude, they have that experience. I respect the entrepreneur. I don't care what you do in entrepreneurship, more than I have the corporate vice president. And the entrepreneurs that I've met that have, like 1 or 2 or 3 stores and that manage it, like say my first wife did, have tended to be nicer people than the average corporate vice president that needs an entourage of 6 people around and says, hey, Alfie, get the detail here. Let's follow up next week. I've pronounced my judgment on you. And when you look at it, get rid of the average corporate VP, fire them, the company doesn't notice. And then the new one comes in, the company didn't notice. And everyone thinks they're going to change the world, but the model's already being kind of built. So the optimist part of let's do something new, let's do something different. Let's do a different communication strategy. Let's recruit in a different way. Whatever your gap that you're passionate about. The people that know that the larger the corporate, the less flexibility and empowerment you have to do something new. Eventually those optimists that say, you know what, I'm going to back myself to do a new type of business. And I might fail. You're going to laugh at me. But before you're allowed to laugh at me, you try it.
Yes, and 99% never do.
Don't. Yeah, so our road is the entrepreneurial vision, is a lonely one. That's why we as entrepreneurs need to stick together. We need to look after each other. I try to buy from any small business I can before I'll buy from a big brand. I try to help anybody who is trying to find their own way through life. It's just, we have to have a support network for ourselves. The government won't, because fundamentally it's easier to deal with 100 big businesses that deal with 80% of the economy than it is with hundreds of thousands that deal with 20% of the economy. I know that's not necessarily the way that the math works out, but it's just easier to deal with smaller entities. So you're always going to pay more attention to the Oracles and the Ciscos than you are going to a 3-person shop down the line. But if no one's going to support that 3 shop down the line, how do we create the passion of what's next? And that to me is what Finxone's about. That to me is to create the technology tools so that class of the new dreamers, the people that are aspiring to do something new, can find that new thing. And the how is taken care of now. I want the world to be about the what.
So for those people that have followed along to the end and they want to learn more about Finxone, where should they go? What should they look at?
Well, Finxone.com is a good place. Finding me on LinkedIn. Love always connecting to new people. It doesn't matter, I always have the time to create those connections. Finxone it's a good website to understand a little bit about the technology that we're doing in FinTech. But our aspiration and our passion is going to be far beyond that. So we're starting in FinTech and we're going into deterministically an AI-generated technology. But now we're pretty soon, we're taking our first customers now that aren't in FinTech, but have some embedded finance and other components. So we're going to continue our journey of being able to, to make any type of application you've wanted to build easy. So if you're interested in that, then find us.
Awesome.
And we'll help.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Alfie.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks for watching this podcast. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, etc., etc. And I'll see you in the next episode.